I'm Paul Orchard. I'm one of the bone marrow transplant physicians here at the University of Minnesota. And I've been interested in transplantation for a lot of the non-malignant diseases, and that's really mostly what I spend my time doing these days. So really my clinic is full of patients that have inherited metabolic types of diseases these days. So that's our interest. It's a long-standing interest, as probably everybody knows, at the University of Minnesota. So what I kind of like to do today is go through a few things. We'll talk a little bit about the background for transplantation, why transplantation for MPS diseases might make some sense. A little bit about how to get to transplant. And we'll talk some about the MPS diseases specifically and why transplant may or may not make sense for them. And then most of the data in terms of transplant is for patients with Hurler. Those are most of the population that we see at transplant. So most of the data is going to be related to the Hurler outcomes, survival, and then how the patients do ultimately, and then where might we go and what things might make it better down the road. So I'm just going to present this as a lot of series of questions, essentially. So the right place to start is, why consider transplant as a potential therapy for lysosomal diseases? So, and this is going back into the late 60s. So this is Liz Neufeld's lab, who initially was working with cells that were derived from patients with Hurler and Hunter and trying to figure out what the issues there. So this is before anybody figured out which enzymes were involved, really. But if you take these cells from a patient with Hurler Hunter and you put them in tissue culture, essentially, in a petri dish, and you can show that those cells accumulate storage material. And so the higher they are here in terms of, there we go. The higher they are here, the more storage material they've got. But if you take cells from patients with Hunter or Hurler, you mix them together with other normal cells, that amount of storage material that's in the Hurler cells or Hunter cells gets dropped down substantially, or goes away almost completely. So this is the concept of cross-correction, really, that we talked about, that's laid the groundwork for using transplant as a type of therapy for MPS disorders, like the lysosomal disorders. So, and just kind of demonstrate how this works. A lot of these enzymes that are produced in the endoplasmic reticulum and go through the Golgi, and they have a mannose-6-phosphate tag put on them. So there's a sugar that's there that identifies these enzymes that are supposed to go to the lysosome. And so they can be picked up by a mannose-6-phosphate receptor, and the lysosomal enzymes locate in the lysosome as they should. So, but it's also important to understand that there are enzymes present, or there are receptors present on the cell surface too. And so if you provide enzyme, either with like enzyme replacement, or you have cells next to it that are making enzyme, the receptors on the cell surface will pick these enzymes up that have this mannose-6-phosphate kind of tag on them and shuttle it into the lysosome. So essentially you can treat cells externally by providing enzyme in the environment. So this is really the whole background for why transplant was considered as therapy for the lysosomal diseases. Because if you can get blood-producing cells that are going to circulate through the whole body, and they're making enzyme and providing enzyme to the cells that are next to them, potentially you can treat somebody that way, and then those blood cells will stick around for the life of the patient, and you have a lifelong treatment. So that's the concept really behind transplant. And this providing enzyme in the environment is really what enzyme therapy is based on as well. So in terms of enzyme therapy, why use transplant and not enzyme therapy? So one of the key things is for the diseases that are neurologically related, that there's some neurologic aspects of the disease. Enzyme given intravenously just doesn't get into the brain very well. So that's a limitation of intravenous enzyme. However, there are some cells that are derived from the blood that make their way into the brain over some span of time after transplantation and can help provide enzyme to cells in the brain. So those cells are called microglia. Those are the cells that we think are primarily helpful in terms of delivering enzyme to the brain and helping stop progression of the disease. So we don't know exactly how well this works, how quickly it works, how extensively it works. That stuff is hard to get at. But this is the way we think transplant helps treat the neurologic disease associated with these lysosomal disorders. So in terms of history of transplant, so the first patient to be transplanted with lysosomal disease was, I think, in 78. It was published in 81, but I think that it was a Hurler patient transplanted in Bristol in the UK. So the first patient that was transplanted with MPS disease in the US was here in Minnesota in 1982. That was Miratola May patient, and then there was a Hurler patient transplanted the next year. And then as there was some evidence that it was working, then it kind of took off from there, really. So when we started, if you didn't have a brother or sister who was a match, you didn't get transplanted, essentially. So over the last 30 years or so, unrelated donors became available. We'll talk about this in a little bit, but unrelated donors became available, and then cord blood grafts became available, and that really opened the door to being able to treat most everybody now with transplant if you think it's the right thing to do. We've also been able to refine the transplant procedures, processes, and drugs, so we're in much better shape than we used to be. So a little bit about the process to getting to transplant. So if a patient needs a transplant, one of the first things that we do, if we consider them a transplant candidate, is get HLA typing on them. So HLA typing or tissue typing is a prerequisite to being able to transplant somebody. So you inherit your HLA typing from your parents, and any siblings that are going to be from the same parents are going to have a 1 in 4 shot of being matched. So that's one of the first questions we ask too, is if somebody needs to be transplanted, are their brothers or sisters you potentially look after, or look out for it and find out if there's an HLA match there. Most of the patients, though, don't have brothers and sisters that are going to serve as a match. And even some of the patients that do have a match brother or sister, they're carriers. It's not necessarily probably the optimal donor that we want to use. So that ends up playing a role. So we certainly still do transplants with brothers and sisters, but not very many, probably about 15%. So otherwise they're looking outside the family. And there's two different directions that one can potentially go. You can either go with the unrelated donor group, or you can go with cord blood. So unrelated donors are people that have been HLA typed, and if their HLA types in a database, and they've basically consented to be considered as a potential donor for somebody that needs a transplant. Unrelated cord bloods, about 25 years ago or so, people had determined that you could get a lot of stem cells out of a placenta, essentially, which is what the term cord blood kind of comes from. So there's now cord blood banks that are throughout the U.S. and throughout the world, essentially, that have been storing cord bloods as a potential source for transplant. So in searching for a donor, again, you want the person who needs to get transplant gets the HLA type done. You can then take that HLA type and go to the databases. So the National Marrow Donor Program, and they call themselves Be the Match now too, so there's those are interchangeable. They're actually like a mile from here. They're right across from the Twins Stadium. So, but we call them up and say, Johnny's got this HLA type. What have you got for us? There's two directions you can go. As I mentioned, you go look at the unrelated donors. You can look at the cord bloods. You can do them simultaneously. So, but the initial part of the search is electronic, and that's free, and that just takes an hour or two, and they will tell you what you've got to work with, potentially. One of the next steps, though, is you initiate a formal search, so then say, well, I'm looking at this cord blood, and I think this is the one we want to use. We want to pursue that cord as a potential graft. So one of the things they would then do is there's small amounts of cells that are set aside for each cord, and they would ship that to us. We would double check the typing, which is the confirmatory typing piece. And then we would make sure that that cord blood that's listed in the database as having a specific HLA type really has that HLA type. So the chance that it's going to be a problem, obviously, is low, but it's important. That piece, though, starts getting billed to people's insurance companies. So we have to get a consent from people that basically says, you understand now, we're going to actually start pursuing the transplant, and it's going to show up on your insurance company's bills, essentially. If you use a cord blood and you confirm that the typing is what it is, we actually would double check it too to make sure that there's enzyme there. If you're looking at transplanting a Hurlic, you want to make sure there's hydrogenase enzyme in that cord blood pellet. So that's another piece. But outside of that, it's done. The unrelated donors are different though. So unrelated donors, may be scattered throughout the U.S. They may be in Berlin or wherever. Those patients need to come in. They have to have an assessment done. They have a physical exam. They have a lot of blood work done. You have to kind of work around people's schedules. Once you decide that you aren't going to hurt them by taking them to the operating room doing marrow harvest, then you have to set up a time that they could actually do get their harvest done so you can proceed with the transplant. So there's a number of steps with unrelated donors that we don't have with the cord blood today. It takes longer. Most of the kids now that we transplant get cord bloods, probably about 80% of them. So this is NMDP data, just showing that this is a year or two old now. There's 13.5 million people at the last count that I had that are in this database now. So there are different ethnic groups and whatnot that are better represented than others, as one might expect. But there's a lot of choices. And most of the people that we are looking to get grafts on, we can find somebody who's going to match. The number of cord bloods is a lot less. So this is a more recent kind of phenomenon in terms of using these as a stem cell source. So, but the matching is easier in the cord bloods. We don't have to match people quite as tightly. So most of the kids we can find a cord blood on as well. So the first transplant ever done with a cord blood was done in 1988. That was a brother-sister kind of deal. First unrelated one that was done in 93. So it's not been all that incredibly long we've been doing this. Like I said, matching is easier and it's quicker. And there's less graft versus host disease in general. So most of the kids can get transplanted with cords. And this slide just basically shows so if we're looking at all pediatric transplants, not just Hurler and MPS disease specific, we're looking at all the kids that get transplanted. So the orange piece here is the proportion they use with cord blood. So that's been an expanding asset to us in terms of donors. So for which diseases transplant makes sense in terms of the MPS disorders? So I'm just going to run through these here kind of quickly. So for MPS 1, we divide them into the kids that have Hurler and the kids that have attenuated disease. For the kids that have Hurler, transplant's really considered the standard of care. Those kids have neurologic problems. Transplant or enzyme replacement therapy incompletely treats them. So assuming the patient can be transplanted and we have a graft, that's generally the direction people go. For attenuated patients, we don't usually do transplant. Now, there may be some considerations here. Some of these patients that have attenuated disease actually may have some neurodevelopmental aspects to them, which might be a consideration. And some people have asked me at meetings, for instance, how good would transplant have to be before you consider opening it up to the attenuated patients? And it's a difficult question, but fundamentally, transplant is different therapy because it's definitive therapy. So it's got risks, it's a big deal, it's a problem, people are in the hospital a long time, people still die with transplant. But it's definitive therapy, so you do it once, hopefully, and then it's done. And then, as opposed to getting enzyme every week for the rest of your life. So those are some of the considerations here. For MPS 2 or Hunter, don't generally do transplant. Hunter is harder because some of the patients that are diagnosed with Hunter, you don't really know what their neurologic disease is going to look like, whether they're really going to have problems or not. Really, the advantage to transplant would be to help treat the neurologic aspects of the disease. But if you don't really know whether they're going to have it or not, it makes it harder. Now, if you had a older brother who you know had neurologic disease, then it makes treating a younger brother more straightforward and easier. Otherwise, it's tough. And if you wait for them to have clear neurologic disease, then you probably missed your opportunity to really effectively treat them. So it's kind of a catch-22. But clearly there's kids that have been treated with transplant that had an older brother that were diagnosed, and the kids were transplanted early, and they look totally different than their older brothers do. So I think there is some efficacy of transplant, but it's a narrow window and it's hard. So I don't know if the biomarkers are, there's some molecular aspects of the disease that would pretty well tip you off that they're going to have neurologic problems, but it's not as clean as we'd like. MPS III or Sanfilippo, and there's 4 different types of Sanfilippos just to muddy the water even more. But generally speaking, we don't transplant at least we don't transplant the kids with Sanfilippo. For whatever reason, it doesn't seem to effectively treat the kids, as well as certainly Hurler patients are treated. There's still some discussions about if you pick up kids really early, would it make a difference there? That data is just not very strong, so it's hard to know. And then, of course, we've got all the issues with the various different genotypes as well. So, in terms of the MPS IV, so the Morpheo patients, we don't generally transplant either. So, enzyme therapy is now available for the A's. Transplant is being done in Japan, though, from Morpheo. And there's some data that it actually may be reasonably effective. But again, there's no neurologic disease associated with this, so it's a tough sell to go to transplant for Morpheo patients. Marrow, actually transplant works reasonably well for Marrow, but again, if there's no neurocognitive aspect of the disease, the benefits of transplant over and above enzyme replacement are less clear. So most of the kids that are picked up now with Marrow just go on enzyme and stay on enzyme. Although, like I say, there's reasonable data that transplant works quite well. And for the MPS VII patients, very little information out there. Some of the animal models suggest that transplant might work, but now there's other things to do for this population of patients too. So, that's not a population you generally go after. And ISL disease is in terms of biologically, is a little bit different than the rest of the lysosomal diseases, because essentially that mannose-6-phosphate piece that you put on there to help direct the enzymes to the lysosome, that's what's missing in ISL disease. So, and we recently published that in our experience, transplant is just not helpful. And this is what the survival curve looks like for the kids that are transplanted for ISL. So we essentially stopped doing it. It's just not justifiable by the outcomes. So I'm going to start talking about Hurler kind of specifically now. It's probably everybody in the room knows there's a myriad of different types of problems that the kids that have MPS I have. Primarily, though, the one that leads us to transplant them is the developmental delay piece. And this was a kind of consensus paper by the European group a couple of years ago. And they essentially mapped out somebody's diagnosed with MPS I, they're less than 2.5 years of age, they go on enzyme and then get transplanted. So that's generally the pathway that we talked about before. You've got true Hurler, you're young enough and you can go through the transplant, that's what you should do. For the kids that are older, they just go on enzyme, with the caveat that in special circumstances, one might consider transplant. That's generally a split of how these patients are cared for. So I'm going to go into a little bit of the data now. Most of the best data is compiling patients across multiple institutions. So some of the centers in the U.S., and this is from Eurocord data, so as you might expect, a lot of these patients are from Europe. So there's 258 patients that were in this study. So and if you kind of draw a line between the younger patients and the older patients, 16.7 months is the median. So if one looks at overall survival across that entire group, it was 74%. This was back to 95 again. Event-free survival essentially means you've gone through transplant, you're alive, and you've got a donor graft. Because if you end up rejecting the donor cells, then we didn't help you with the transplant. So that's the number that really kind of matters. When we talk about chimerism, we talk about whose cells are whose. So you can, out to 3 significant digits now, say that somebody is 68.4% engrafted, meaning 68.4% of the cells in the blood are donor. So that's an important parameter after transplant. Is, are you fully engrafted? Are you completely engrafted? How high or low are you? And then we can also look at enzyme levels too. There's some suggestion in this study that the kids with getting cord blood grafts did a little better. So one of the key things I wanted to get across, so this is stratifying patients based on when they were transplanted. So again, this started at 95. So look, from 95 to 99 is 53%. 99 to 2001 is 57%. 2002 to 2004 is 67%. And it's 80% after 2004. So just to demonstrate, as we talked about before, we've been able to refine transplant enough that the survival is improved over time with the population of patients. So again, 16.7 months is the median. So there's half the kids are older, half the kids are younger, and you look at survival, this is what you see. So the younger kids do better. And this is kind of complicated, but let me walk you through this a little bit. So in terms of outcomes with transplant, what's the influence of the donor and how well matched is the donor? So that's what this really kind of looks like. So the gold standard for years has been having a brother or sister. If you look at a fully matched cord blood graft now, those curves are really right on top of each other. So you can almost get to as good an outcome as having a brother or sister if you've got a really well-matched cord. If you look at a well-matched unrelated donor, it's not quite as high. And that curve is almost right on top of the one antigen mismatched cord blood. So if we look at 6 antigens, or historically look at 6 antigens in terms of matching for cord blood, one of them is off, this is kind of the drop-off. And if 2 of them are off, this is the drop-off. And this is the mismatched unrelated donors. So, as you might expect, the better your graft is in terms of matching, the better you do. Now, so this question comes up: would enzyme prior to transplant provide a benefit? So, the rationale here was, we see a new patient that's got hurler. They're going to go on a transplant mode pathway. It takes a while for us to set their transplant up. So there's already kind of a built-in delay from the time that diagnosis is made to the time transplant would happen. So there's an opportunity to treat somebody with enzyme for usually a couple of months at least before they go to transplant. So if you can clear some of that storage material out of the kids, their airways may be a little better, their livers are a little better, their lungs may be a little bit better, maybe you can make it easier for the kids going through transplant. That's really the rationale. I don't know if I heard that comment. So there's a couple of potential problems, though, that might occur with transplant. And one is, most of these kids with HERV are going to make enzyme. They're going to make antibody to their enzyme. And is that going to end up being a problem? So there was a concern that if you're making antibody to enzyme, then you're going to put donor cells in that are making enzyme, that might potentially be an issue. So that was one of the things. So we pooled our data from Minnesota with the data from Manchester, because they do essentially the same thing we do. And they see a lot of patients with hurler, transplant a lot of patients with hurler. So overall survival in the patients that had gotten enzyme in the peri-transplant period is 88%. 81% is, again, do you have a donor graft as well as surviving? So some of those patients rejected, and most of those patients were retransplanted and did well after their transplant. So, essentially the data is that if you get enzyme in the peri-transplant period, you're likely to do very well. So, assuming somebody has hurler, goes through transplant, what are the limitations of what we can do with transplant? So this is the orthopedic outcome from that same population of patients in that study. So, I mean, the nuts and bolts of this is a lot of the kids, despite going through transplant, despite having donor cells, have a lot of orthopedic problems. So this is really time to having to have surgery for one of these various problems. So, let's have carpal tunnel surgery, back surgery, knee or hip surgery, or cord compression. So it's a big issue. We don't fix these kids as well as we would like. Now, you can look at that data in a couple different directions. So one way to do it would be to divide it up again into an older and younger age group and to see if that makes a difference. And essentially it does. So if you're transplanted younger and you look at what's the likelihood you need to have carpal tunnel surgery, it's quite statistically different. So the kids that are transplanted younger are less likely to need carpal tunnel surgery. Same thing in cord compression. And actually you see the same thing in hip surgery and knee surgery. So if you're transplanted younger, it's a less of a chance that you're going to need to have orthopedic interventions. You can also do it a different direction. So you can say, if you divide the kids up into those that have higher enzyme levels after transplant or lower enzyme levels after transplant, and look to see what difference that makes, that's what this is. So again, this is carpal tunnel, but if you have a higher enzyme delivery after transplant, you're less likely to have carpal tunnel surgery. Same thing with cord compression, same thing with knees, same thing with hips. So, people ask me, so what are the outcomes for the kids that have hurler going through transplant? So there's a lot of different pieces to this, as we've kind of already discussed. The condition of the patient coming in ends up being really important. Occasionally we see kids with hurler, for instance, that their cardiac dysfunction is severely affected. So they make us nervous if they have to take them to transplant. The kids that have more severe mutations are more likely to have problems after transplant too, so that's a factor. We talked about donor source, how well engrafted are you, or how well matched are you? How much enzyme are you going to make after transplant? The chemotherapy piece ends up being important too. So we've traditionally used chemotherapy that was devised for treating kids with leukemia. And, we're comfortable using that because we've got a lot of experience in kids with leukemia, but it's not leukemia. So you need to get the donor cells in there, otherwise you haven't provided any benefit with the transplant, but you don't have to get rid of leukemia. So you don't have to kill off malignant cells in this situation. So the question is whether you can back off a little bit on your chemotherapy and make kids less sick, potentially have better survival by using reduced intensity regimens in terms of transplant. The flip side of that is you back off too much, the donor cells may not take. So trying to thread that needle is what we spend a lot of our time trying to figure out how to do. And then what kind of complications do you have after transplant? So if you have rejection, for instance, so the donor cells go away, obviously the transplant can help you. So that's the engraftment question. If you have a lot of graft versus host disease, that can affect how you're doing after transplant and the enzyme levels as well. So there's a lot of different pieces in terms of what can affect your outcomes of transplant. So a couple things just to pull this together. So survival's gotten better over decades. The age of the kid ends up being important. Matching is important. But even with all those things, transplant doesn't do as good a job as we'd like it to. And that's clear. So we see a lot of kids that are, years out after transplant that have especially orthopedic-related problems that limit what they can do and affect their quality of life. The cognitive piece is a concern as well. And it's very clear to me that we need other things to do to make transplant better. If we get somebody through transplant, they're fully engrafted, being all donor cells, that's really all we can do with transplant, unless we have something else to add. So I want to show this too. So, I mean, one of the opportunities we have in Minnesota is we see a lot of kids with Hurler. So if you look at the NMDP, they list who was transplanted where for what on their website. And if you go through their website and say, you know, who's listed on there as having Hurler that's got a transplant or having had a transplant done and where they had it done, 29% of the kids that had a transplant through the NMDP were done here. So that allows us to ask questions, you know, with our own internal data. One of the things that we looked at here recently is how are these kids doing really years and years out after transplant? Because we started, you know, a generation ago, really. And so we want to find out what's been affecting them. So one of the questions is, because, you know, Mom might ask me, we just admitted a patient 2 days ago to start the transplant process. So how long is he going to live? I don't know. I mean, we've only been doing this for 30 years. I can't really tell you. So we're trying to get at some of this data now. So a lot of it, and this goes back to the beginning. So, you know, a lot of the survival problems that we have are in that early post-transplant mode. So a lot of the kids that die relatively early. But there's been kids that we've been losing along, you know, 10, 15, 20 years after transplant. So we don't understand this as well as we would like. So some of this data is actually pulled from death certificates because they've been transplanted to Minnesota, but they died in Tampa or Albuquerque or whatever. And so trying to really understand what they died from sometimes is kind of hard.
Well, those early ones died from transplant complications.
What's that?
Slide. Those early ones, those died from transplant.
Most of these, this steep drop off in terms of survival, most of that's transplant related stuff. So
you're saying at like 30%, or I mean 30 years following transplant, or at 30 years old, you only have 30 to 40% survival still?
That's what the numbers are. Now, you know, and again, we aren't doing transplant the way we were doing transplant 20 or 30 years ago. So, you know, we used to use radiation for transplants. We don't do that anymore. So, I mean, those things make a difference too. I mean, that's an open question. I mean, so we try to actually get at some of that. So if you look at the kids that were transplanted before 2004 and after 2004 and just look at their survival out to 8 years after transplant, those are what the curves look like. But, you know, the kids that were transplanted after 2004, I mean, that's only, you know, 13 years ago. So I don't know what their curve is going to look like when they're 25 years out. You know what I mean? So we're just going to have to do the best we can in following people to try to figure those things out. So one of the issues, too, is in terms of the cognitive piece. And so we did a study here, started this almost 10 years ago, looking at delivering enzyme in the spinal fluid, see if we could actually help with the cognitive problems that the kids have. So and this is Elsa and Bill Krivet's data from way back. Elsa's in the back. If you don't treat the patients, this is the neurologic decline that you see. And this is what we tend to see with transplant. So, you know, there's a lot of variation here in terms of how the kids are doing in a pre-transplant mode. But the majority of them lose a fair amount of ground between the time we first see them, assess them, and the time you look a year out after transplant. So, and as I mentioned, you know, it takes a couple months generally to set the transplant up. It probably takes another month or so to get enzyme into the bloodstream. It may take several months after that to get enzyme into the brain. So, you know, up until that time, you really haven't even treated the patient's head. So we think that's a lot of what this is. So and this is busy as well, but this kind of shows you what the intrathecal transplant protocol looks like. So we initially see the patients, we do the evaluation, their sedation and imaging and all that kind of stuff here. They have a line placed. They got one dose of intrathecal enzyme here. When they go home, they're on intravenous enzyme too. They come back for the transplant. They have another sedation, evaluation, whatnot. They get a second dose here. So it's roughly 2-3 months after the first dose. because we tried to time this with when the kids were going to get sedated anyway, because we don't want to have to sedate the kids more times than we need to. Before we send the kids home, at 100 days after transplant, there's another evaluation sedation. They get a third dose here, and then they get another one at 6 months. So there's 2 doses before, 2 doses after transplant, roughly over 9 months or so, 8 or 9 months. So you can look at gags in the urine. You can look at gags in the head too, or at least in the CSF. So, and this is from a report looking at kids with Hurler prior to any sort of intervention, and just shows what the gags look like. So the kind of beige ones here are what gags are in normal people, and you can see that if you have Hurler, the gag levels tend to be high. So this is something we can look at in terms of how we're doing with the intrathecal treatment. This is what we tend to see. So these patients are naive here. They haven't had any sort of therapy. So, and that's what the gags look like in the spinal fluid. They get a dose of intrathecal drug, and they go on enzyme, and they come back for a second dose of enzyme, and this is what the gags look like. Generally, they stop enzyme, they get transplanted, and then this is 3 months out after transplant, so it's come down even more, and then 6 months out. So this is the biochemical correction that we're seeing. The key thing, though, is how are these patients really doing? And so Julie Isengard is pulling that data together for us now, but I don't have it yet. So another question that one might ask is, we know transplant insufficiently treats these patients. Would giving enzyme after transplant and giving a little bit additional enzyme make a difference? So we had a protocol set up to look at that as well. This is what that looks like. So it had to be at least a couple years out after transplant, and this is a pilot kind of deal, so there's only 10 kids on this study. So we wanted to have them less than 14 years of age, just in case there was some benefit to the orthopedic side of things. We didn't, if you're 18 or whatever, you're probably not going to get as much of a benefit. Then you had to have a graft, otherwise it's a different question. Went on standard doses of enzyme, 2 years, came back every 6 months, and evaluations done, trying to see if this makes a difference. So one of the things that was really interesting in terms of this is that, so almost all the Hurler kids, if they're naive, haven't been treated with anything, they start enzyme, almost all of them make antibody. So and the data that was available to us is that if you go through transplant and stop enzyme, all that antibody goes away. So we looked at the 10 kids prior to starting, and there's virtually no antibody present. But a couple of these kids that went on enzyme, they made pretty high titer antibodies, which is kind of unexpected. I mean, because you would think that they now have a graft, so they have cells that are making enzyme that should be in circulation. So, why are they developing antibodies with Aldurazyme? So, I mean, it suggests certainly that there's some issues with immunogenicity with Aldurazyme kind of over and above the enzyme they're making from their own cells. So, a lot of the families ask us now whether they should stay on enzyme after transplant, and I don't have any great data to suggest that it's going to make a huge difference, but if they decide that they wanted to go on enzyme, this is something we'd have to keep close tabs on. Some of these kids actually that had high titer antibodies, their gags actually went up after treatment instead of down, which suggests that this antibody is actually getting in the way of the transplant therapy, which is not clearly where we want to be. Yes,
Did you look at the sort of markers of effectiveness of transplant in those 3 patients? Were they doing poorly otherwise?
Yeah, I should have thrown that in here. So if you look at the gags, the urine gag levels in all 10 patients and treat them as a group, it comes down somewhat, slightly. If you stratify them and you take these 3 patients and look at them in comparison to the other 7, it goes different directions. So these patients that have high titer antibody, the gags went up. as opposed to the rest of them went down.
But what about clinical markers? Are there any other clinical
Well-
markers of efficacy that?
So, thank you for that. So, I'm still trying to figure out how best to present this data. So there's a lot of data points. We did a lot of things in trying to sort out if it made a difference. So this is, the blue stuff is range of motion. 6-minute walk tests, and we put the kids on a treadmill actually, finding out what their heart rates did and how long they would stay on the treadmill. This is testing of strength, and then this is height related stuff. So, bright green is making significant benefit. Red is actually worse. Black is not, nothing's changed. So, there's a lot of data points on here, but as you get a sense, so the range of motion stuff doesn't look like they made a whole lot of difference. Some of the other parameters may actually have kind of improved. So, but I don't have all the statistics and that kind of stuff on this yet. So Linda Polbrain is pulling that together and is going to help us get that published.
Paul, were all those patients on Aldurazyme before transplant?
No, there was 3 of them that were on Aldurazyme prior to transplant. But none of them were on enzyme within 6 months or so of the study.
How long were they on enzyme? I missed that data point. After
On the study?
On the study, yes.
2 years.
2 years. And did was there ever any tolerizing with time?
The data will be in the paper, but some of the kids that had the high titer antibody, it's tended to stay up. So, yeah.
Did you distinguish between the total antibody versus neutralizing antibody in the titers?
Well, so Genzyme will do the total antibody titers for us. And then Brian Bigger, who's in Manchester, is trying to do the inhibitory antibody, the functional antibody piece. So that should all go in the paper, too.
The intrathecal protocol was different than what Agnes Chin and Patty Dixon did for attenuated population. Well, I think they were once every month, for 3 months, and then once every 90 days.
Yeah.
Why the difference?
Well, so part of it is to get around the IRB.
Okay.
So, taking a 1 or 2 year old to the OR and doing a spinal tap with experimental therapy is a little bit hard. So, we rationalized it. So first, Patty's data in the dogs suggested that infrequent dosing maybe is close to, maybe reasonably close to getting it more frequently, like every month. So that was part of the background of it. And the other piece was just to coincide with spinal taps with sedation the kids would otherwise kind of get. Biologically, it may have been better if we didn't do it. And I think that's what's happening for the 100 patients, for instance, in the study. So, if we go back 10 years and maybe I tried to convince the IRB that we could do it every month, but that's problematic. So, yes?
Will you have antibody data on the CSF in this intrathecal study?
Yeah, so Patty Dixon's going to do that for us. I've seen some of the preliminary stuff. There's very little that's there.
Okay, and these are lumbar punctures?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
You also talked about the age under 14. Did you see a difference in the kids who were closer to transplant than the kids who were farther out?
I don't know if we looked at data that way. I don't think so, but I'd have to go back and kind of check that out. So one of the questions that we've addressed too is this whole reduced intensity transplant piece, and how matching might influence that. So again, the 6 of 6 matched cord bloods. Historically, people have looked at just 6 antigens, and they look at the A and B on a relatively lower resolution assay, and then DRs are a higher resolution. So, that's been our standard for a decade, maybe longer. But we actually looked in patients that were getting a reduced intensity regimen here, and their what their engraftment looked like. And if you look at it in higher resolution, so you look at typing and matching in a much more sophisticated way, this curve splits out into these two. So they're both 6 antigen matched the way we used to do it. But if you do the high resolution testing, the kids that are better matched have a better outcome than the kids that aren't as well matched. So we now changed what we're doing in terms of matching for the hurler kids.
Since when?
Since about 18 months ago. So, and there's another larger study that was done through the NMDP that suggested that you see the same thing in some of the other kids that have non-malignant disease. So I think it's going to hold up. So, but it's pretty clear we can incompletely treat the brain and we can completely treat the bone. You know, whether it combination therapy, be it enzyme, be it gene therapy, be it other drugs that may be available, I don't know. And so most of us, the transplant people, are trained in oncology. There's very few single drugs that you use on an oncology mode. Generally, we use combination therapy to get better outcomes. I think it's going to be the same kind of thing here. So newborn screening is going to change the landscape here as well. So we're going to start picking up these kids very early. Give us an opportunity to see how much difference we can make in them. And then, you know, there's at least 4 or 5 companies that I'm aware of that are interested in gene therapy for MPS I. So these things are going to happen, and the question is going to be, do they get partnered with enzyme, do they partner with transplant, are they going to be okay on their own, or what's going to happen? It's, next 10 years or so, we're going to get a lot more information about how these things are going to sort themselves out. So, all right, I'm going to stop there. Any other questions about the transplant side of things? Sure.
2 questions. You mentioned the enzyme testing of the cords. How long has that actually been going on? Because we were told that they were afraid to waste sample to test for enzyme.
Well, so there's a story that I heard that there's a baby with Hurler that was going to get transplanted, and they did a search. They found a cord that was a really well-matched cord, and it was only because somebody looked at the date that the cord was collected and looked at the date of the kid, and it was the kid's own cord. So, which could have been a disaster, but I mean, you know, the family was in an institution where you donate a cord. And, you know, so it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. And, you know, when people are diagnosed with a disease like that, you don't necessarily go back to the place that collected your cord and say, oh, you might just want to know that my baby's got Hurler. So that's our standard, is we would take a small part of this cord and send it off. I mean, the problem ends up being that, you know, most of the places that do enzyme levels do it in fresh cells, and not in thawed or blood remnants. And so, you know, David Wenger has done most of the stuff for us. So I can tell you that there's enzyme in this cord blood, but I can't tell you how it sorts out in terms of it's high or low or whatever. So we haven't really done it in terms of picking cords to say this cord's got better enzyme than this cord does, for instance. But at least we try to, you know, it's 1 in 100,000 shot that you're going to pick up a cord that's got, it came from a Hurler kid, but in bad form. So, and it's, you know, it's easy enough to do. But I don't know that we can distinguish, for instance, a carrier in doing this from somebody who's.
Second question, you had posted change of chemotherapy, and you've written Cytoxin versus fludarabine. Which one is the newer?
So we try to get away from Cytoxin. So, you know, fludarabine is a lot less toxic than the Cytoxin is, but, you know, the graft failure rate has been a little higher. So we got to figure out how to finesse that too. I mean, it's their ATG or other things that can help you kind of get where you want to be. But it's been nice because the kids aren't in the hospital as long, they don't get as sick, they're not. That span of time where they don't have any neutrophils is much shorter. So it's got a lot to offer. It's just a matter of trying to
But it really makes space.
fine tune it. Well, I mean, their counts come down to nothing, but it takes a week longer. So, I mean, I think actually you make enough space. I think immunologically, it's switching from Cytoxan to fludarabine. Fludarabine isn't as immunologically damaging to the residual immune system. So I think that's where we're going to focus.